It is my pleasure to introduce you to Ali Muldrow. She is the Racial Justice Youth Organizer at the Gay Straight Alliance for Safe Schools. Her pronouns are she, her, and hers. She has a very interesting resume. She is a poet, a mama, a doula, and an educator, and we are so pleased to welcome her in her role as facilitator for this panel. Thank you so much.
How's everybody doing? Thank you. Thank you for that response. I'm going to go over kind of the ground rules for what it means for us to be here together, and what that is going to kind of manifest as and can look like. And so we want folks to be here with an open heart, an open mind, to be ready to listen to one another and ready to celebrate listening to one another. We want folks to use I statements and to talk from their personal experiences, not to generalize. We want to share the air, so there's going to be kind of a give and take in this conversation, in this dialogue, and we hope folks are down for that. We want to challenge behavior and respect people, so we don't want to blame folks for systemic issues. We want to recognize, and separate folks from large-scale systematic problems that we've all absorbed. We want to listen actively and be real in the space and be here with one another. And we want to lean into discomfort. There are going to be things said that are hard to understand, that you have to go the extra mile in listening to, that you have to really take into consideration and ponder. And we ask you to have the audacity and courage to do that. And I think that is it for ground rules. Can we make some noise for self-respect, informing respect for one another? I'm going to read off the questions we asked folks to take into consideration when preparing what they were going to talk about and how they were going to address y'all tonight. Those questions were: 1, what does inequity look like in your work as it pertains to young children, race, and privilege? 2, how do you and/or your organization work to address inequity? And 3, 5 to 10 years from now, what do you want your work to mean, and how do you imagine your work will have evolved as we move towards equity? So keep those questions in mind. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our first panelist. Gloria Ladson Billings is the Kellner Family Distinguished Professor in Urban Education in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction, and is faculty affiliated in the Department of Education Policy Studies, Educational Leadership and Policy Analysis, and Afro-American Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She was the 2005-2006 president of the American Educational Research Association. Ladson Billings research examines the pedagogical practices of teachers who are successful with African American students. She also investigates critical race theory, applications, and education. In addition to her scholarly activities, Ladson Billings has been an active member of the broader community. She is a member of the board of directors of the Urban League of Greater Madison, a member of the Vision Council of the United Way of Dane County, a member of the board of directors of the Madison Children's Museum. She formerly served as a member of the board of directors of the Susan G. Komen for the Cure, and remains an active advocate for African American women's health. In 2007, Ladson Billings was ordained as a deacon in her church, only the second woman in the church's 104-year history. Ladson Billings is 48 year member of the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority, Inc., and a member of the Lynx, Inc. Please put your hands together for Gloria, y'all.
Again, thank you, Ali, and thank you all for being here, and thank you for that introduction. In 1997, I published an article entitled, "I Don't See Color, I Just See Children." And I published it because most of my work is really with older youngsters from middle school through high school, but I wanted to write something that spoke to the early childhood community. And I guess the impetus for writing the article was the fact that I had just gone through early childhood experiences with my daughter. And when I tell you, like, I'm a bad early childhood educator, I'll tell you that right now. I don't understand why people are crying. Why are you crying? You know, why are you crying? You know, so, and it was a difficult experience for me because I didn't know the rules of early childhood in middle-class affluent communities. My daughter went to preschool in Palo Alto, California. And I didn't know you're supposed to enroll them when they're in utero. So I show up with a 3-year-old saying, like, we're ready to come to school, and they're like, well, when's the baby due? I'm like, no, this one. And so, oh dear, you're much too late. So the only way that I could get her into preschool was to agree to be what was called a participating parent, which meant one day a week I had to be there. So I had to get them to swear that I didn't have to do anything with her, because my whole point was to take her there so I could go somewhere else. So they agreed that, yes, you can play with the other kids. And I had a very, very interesting experience there where there was one young child there who we were playing together one day, and he was a recent immigrant from Italy, northern Italy. And we were playing, and he said to me, as he looked across the room at the 2 black children that were in the preschool, "Which one is yours?" And it was interesting to me that the adults in the room seemed uncomfortable that he asked that question. I thought it was a perfectly logical question. There were 3 black people in that place. I was one, and he wanted to know which one of those. To me, that was an observation a child would make. And so I said, oh, the girl, Jessica, that's my daughter. So that particular interaction kind of went okay. But then a few days later, the same youngster showed up with a beautiful sweater, clearly a handmade sweater, and I admired it. And he says, oh, my grandmother made this sweater. My grandmother in Italy, and she sent it to me. And she sent me one, and she sent my sister one, and my mom one, and my dad one. And I said, oh, Marco, I'm going to have to come to your house so I can get one of these sweaters. And he said, oh, you can't live at my house. There's no brown people at my house. This time, in unison, the adults said, Marco, that's not nice. And what I realized that what he was doing was making an observation. He wasn't making a judgment. And he had not had what I call the social funding of race. In other words, race didn't mean anything to him. But it was clear to me that by the time he was in 2nd and 3rd grade, he would have clear understandings of the rules of race in our society, because he was going to keep getting sanctioned every time he made any observation about difference. The second thing that really kind of triggered my thinking about this is that my daughter developed a very close friendship when she was in kindergarten with another immigrant child from China. And they were extremely close because this family really didn't know very much about the U.S., and so we were helping them with things like driver's license and getting the utilities turned on. So when we moved to Madison the next year, they were shell-shocked, because we were really their support. As things would have it, they moved to suburban Chicago a year later because the father finished his postdoc. So we got the kids together. And so now they're about 7 or 8 years old, and I overhear a conversation between the two of them, and this little girl, and I'll call her Ming Lee, said something about being yellow. And my daughter said, wow, when we were in California, you said you were white. And she said, yeah, I didn't know. So one of the things that I was thinking about, what has happened to her in the 2 years? I had an experience with this little girl when she came in my house as a 5-year-old and asked for where's the white Barbie? And I went, I don't have a white Barbie. And she said, as a 5-year-old would say, she said, why? So I said, well, Ming Lee, I just don't think a white Barbie would feel all that comfortable living here. And she said, why? I said, well, because, there's no other white dolls here, and she would, be the only white doll, and it just might not feel good for her. Why? And this went on, and I kept coming up with reasons why the doll wouldn't be comfortable. And then finally she said, oh, there she is. There's the white Barbie. Now my head is swirling like The Exorcist, because who bought a white Barbie to my house, right? But it turns out this is a black Barbie. She is wearing a wedding dress. So you see why I say the way the kids are making observations that make sense to them, and we are putting meaning in it. So I want to kind of wrap up by saying that we teach our kids about race by how we respond to it. When we pull away, where we don't let them go places, where we say, oh, well, that neighborhood's not really nice, or there are all kinds of signals that we give kids that do what I would call socially fun race. We make it have meaning. So I think our wrap-up question was, so in 5 to 10 years from now, where will we be as a result of trying to do some work against this? I think if we don't get this right, that our kids are going to continue to suffer from the inequity and inequality that we continue to feed. I think instead of things getting better, and we always have this narrative of progress in our society, I think what will happen is that we will see very separate and distinct communities. We already see it as adults, but our children will be participating in it in a way that I think will be extremely detrimental to their well-being.
I'm going to introduce Eva Schultz. Is a mother, an educator, a community organizer. She is a white woman who has been involved in racial justice work in different forms for more than a decade. She is a member of Groundwork, a community organization that uses education and action to work for racial justice and equity in Madison and Dane County. She's also a co-founder of Families for Justice, a multi-generational organization that engages whole families in racial justice work. As a mother to 2 children, ages 3 and 6, she is passionate about thinking about how to raise race-conscious children and doing this work with others. Her commitment to racial justice is an ongoing journey from the heart of building relationships and learning, making mistakes and discovering courage. She is grateful for the many people of color and white anti-racist activists who have modeled how to do this work boldly and with integrity, and who continue to inspire her. Make some noise, y'all.
Great, thank you. Can y'all hear me? Yeah. Well, it is such an honor to be sitting up here on this panel, and it's really an honor to be sitting in front of a room full of people who have come and care about the issues that we're talking about today. And I'm just going to tell a little bit of my story and the work of Groundwork and Families for Justice. Groundwork started in 2005, really as a group of people, of white folks who wanted to be engaged in racial justice work. And so really listening to people of color who are leaders in the community who are saying, okay, y'all need to go and work with your people. That's where you can really make the most impact. And so Groundwork formed to do self-education, to support people of color-led organizations that were doing racial justice work, and to work with our people, to work with other white folks in education and action. Now, as some of us who are involved in Groundwork and who had gone through Groundwork workshops and training started having families, we really felt the need to have a space where we could bring our whole families into racial justice work and to figure out what that would look like. So, you know, we really are, and it has been a journey. It's like we're learning all the time and we're making mistakes all the time, and that's part of the process of moving forward. So, you know, we really focused on learning how do we talk to our kids about race. I think most of us don't have the experience because we didn't grow up we didn't grow up in a family that talked about race, and so. In our first years, we were really getting together and meeting monthly or quarterly and organizing activities, age-appropriate activities, to talk to our kids about fairness and unfairness and race. And for me and my family, that was a fundamental formed a fundamental basis for how I can talk to my kids now, because it really provided us with the language to talk about race, and it made it normal that it's something our family does. We talk about race, and we talk about race with other families. And the flip side or the other part of that is it really helped build my confidence to speak up. You know, it's the empowerment piece that I have this community of other families that I know that are my support group, and I'm not alone trying to figure it out. And together, we're trying to figure things out. So these are really kind of the big, the two parts that Families for Justice works for, is really trying to bring this into our families, talking about race and talking about fairness and unfairness, but then also taking the next step and taking action. After Michael Brown was killed and Ferguson was really taking the national stage, there was a rally down at Penn Park, and so I probably, as myself, wouldn't have gone. But as the Families and Families for Justice said, let's all go, let's take our families, and we'll meet there. And that also forced me to have this conversation with my then 4 or 5-year-old about where were we going, and what were people going to be talking about, and why were they talking about, and why was it important? And yeah, I was like, how do I find the right words, and how do I not make him be scared, but it's important. And I remember very vividly being on the playground, like before the rally was starting, and all kids from the neighborhood playing on the playground, and there was probably a 5-year-old black boy with a button that says, "Hands up, don't shoot." And that was the moment where it really shifted from going to my brain, from understanding things in my head to understanding things in my heart. When I realized, what are the conversations that boy's family is having in his home at this time? And I can have just a little bit of courage to have conversations in my family about race. And I can have a little more courage to speak up and to act up when it's needed. So to kind of look at some of the questions, well, what does inequality look like, and how do we address it in Families for Justice? We start with the basic premise that racism and inequality exists. It's institutional. It's in all of our institutions. It's pervasive and it's persistent. The U.S. has hundreds of years legacy of racism, and it's in all of our institutions. So really, our question is, for those of us who are white, as white folks doing this work, what's our role? And what's our role with our young children? And what's our role in our families? And what's our role in our schools? So I guess just to put our vision, and we're imperfect in it, is to be actively challenging racism every day. So I think on looking at some of our challenges and successes. I think that some of the challenges that as parents, as adults, like we as white folks who are parents and adults, we have so much discomfort about talking about race. It's loaded with guilt and shame and fear about, am I going to say the right thing? Am I going to do the wrong thing? And so that's why it's hard to have these conversations with our kids. But I like personally, I have to remind myself every day to think about race because I have the privilege not to. I have the privilege not to think about it, and so it's really important. And I know that there's a lot of ways that I when I don't see it, and I'm not challenging that notion that white culture is what's normal, and white culture is, the white culture is setting what's normal for our kids. The way that in Families for Justice we have seen success in that within ourselves is that we're really building a community, and the community piece is so key to that. We're building relationships to educate ourselves, we're building relationships to educate others, and we're making mistakes along the way. We make a lot of mistakes, you know. But if we're willing to go there, it's a transformative process. One of our other challenges is that we're working with families and parents, and we're all busy. You know, the couple of hours before I was here, I was chasing after my 3-year-old, helping my 6-year-old try to do a project, getting dinner on the table, and it's just it's an act. It feels like success just to get out the door, and I know that a lot of you can probably relate to that. So we've really tried to support each other so that we can participate in the world in a way that matters to us. So in some of the ways we've done that is to really think about, well, how can we create family-friendly spaces in organizing? If we want to go to a demonstration, like how can we bring our kids, or how can we offer childcare so that other folks can go? And then the big piece that is really looking at the challenges that we're looking at institutional inequities and institutional racism, and it's systemic. It's big. It's bigger than any of us. But we know that institutions are not going to change on their own. There may be very well-intentioned people within them, but it takes healthy pressure from people saying that something different needs to be done. So within Families for Justice, we feel it is important to be talking with our families. It's also very important to take the next step and put that into action. So I think that as white parents and white families, we really want, to have the power of our collective voice, be saying, yes, we want our education system to work for everybody. We want, this is important to us. And to be really deeply listening and working in partnership with people of color so that we can hear what is most important, hear what's most pressing. And we really invite others who want to be engaged in this work, because it takes all of us. Just in 5 to 10 years, what do we hope this looks like? We hope Madison looks different. We hope that white folks are stepping up with courage. We hope that there's real relationships being built across color lines, and that people of color are being heard and are in visible leadership positions. I think I really approach this work as the long haul. This is going to go on beyond my lifetime. That's why it's important that, for me, it's important that we're raising the next generation differently than how I was raised. But that, really to think of like this is a lifetime's journey. It's a lifetime's journey, and we need each other, and we need community, and we need those strong and deep relationships with each other.
I love that you talked about the long haul. I love to tell students oppressive systems took thousands of years to create, so it's probably going to take us at least a couple months to work on it, right? Like, we're going to need at least 5 to 7 weeks, or maybe a little longer, and that's okay too. So thank you for that. I'm going to introduce Kaleem Care, I'm going to read his longer introduction, shorter introduction. I'm going to say that Kaleem Care is a dear friend of mine, and if I had to summarize him, I would talk about the amazing children that he has raised and his really beautiful family, and how that gives me a lot of courage in raising my own children. When I met Kaleem, it was a field trip, and his 3 children were taking this field trip to Milwaukee to do poetry with me, and they all look exactly like him. So it was really, I was like, oh my gosh, why did it not occur to me that these children look exactly like this guy who's always on the news? And he was like, hey, how's it going? Can I have your number? I'm gonna call you and make sure they get back on time. And you know, his children are these wonderful, radiant, innovative young people. And I think that's quite an accomplishment to raise a 17-year-old black man to know how to play and to know how to love himself and to be willing to go out there on a limb for his friends. And so that's what I would, if I was gonna write your bio, that's what I'd say.
Yeah, you know, after people read your bio so much, you get tired of hearing it, you know? Thank you. That was awesome. So I want to start out by just telling you before I start so you understand where I'm coming from, what my philosophy on leadership is. And it's 4 things. First, you have to be a knowledge leader in whatever it is you take up. So whereas Al is in poetry, she understands not just how to speak poetry. I got to go closer? Okay, sorry. She understands not only that, but she understands the history, the artistic ability, the people who've done this before. She understands a range of that, and therefore she's considered credible in what she does. So you have to be a knowledge leader. You also have to be able to motivate people and raise their consciousness. And sometimes people do that, but some leaders you think are rugged and rough and raw, right? But they still raise your consciousness. They can still motivate you to get up out your chair and do something, even if it's to throw something at them, right? Integrity, you have to operate with integrity all the time, because that will undermine any social movement, anything that you're trying to do. If people see that you lack integrity, you can't lead them. And then the 4th thing is you have to be willing to go all out. You have to be willing to put it all on the line for whatever it is you believe in and whatever it is you feel really called to do to make sure that it works, right? You can't stop short all the time. And I just want to say that because a lot of people, when we talk about where we are with inequity, I often like to start with just a brief history, and it's going to be real quick. Black people were in some form of slavery or servitude to this country. We lived in some form of legalized discrimination for 372 years, 19 generations. We have really only been in the civil rights equity world for the last 50 years, would be 2 generations. So what I tell people is, do you honestly think you could undo 19 generations of madness in 2, right? When white folks get upset or they get hurt or depressed, they are more likely than black people to go seek some psychological help. They are. I think all of us need to, but when we came out of slavery, out of those 19 generations of that, we had, over 300, almost 300 years of slavery, another 100 years of Jim Crow, and then I call it an adjustment period of another 27 years. We were fighting civil rights cases to retain the gains that we made and trying to gain more ground all the way up to the last great case in 1991. And some people will argue we're still fighting that battle in higher education, right? Trying to fight the rollback. There was no one waiting at the end of the line when we got off the plantation or we got out of Jim Crow that said, hey, let me give you some psychological support, right? There was nothing. So essentially, we walked into freedom with all the baggage that we came with, and we see that in our public schools still today, okay? So I want to give you that understanding. So there's a history here that we're working through and we are trying to undo. So I see myself as being a person who's come along lately, right? And I'm of the next generation, and I'm trying to undo what was done to us in the past and also help shape a future, a destiny for us, a path for us that we can move beyond where we are into the future, but also make a contribution to society. So when I look at equity, that's when I'm moving people forward who were held back for generations. Now, poverty is killing us. Poverty is killing black people. It is killing black bloodlines. When you think of all of those generations of young people who have come up through our country, come up across slavery, across the bridge of Jim Crow, their families, very few of them realize some form of serious prosperity. I tell white people all the time, black people are really like 2 to 3 generations behind you, and it was by design. When people talk about affirmative action, when white folks had affirmative action, wasn't nobody complaining, right? And so white people could access housing bills, they could access veterans bills, they could access all these things with the New Deal. Everything was to help move white America forward. A lot of those things black people couldn't access. And even we were legally allowed to access it, the states discriminated against us so badly. That's why when you saw the movie about Martin Luther King, Glory, and they're in there just about voting, I mean, basic things, people are always trying to undermine us. And so we now are in this situation that America has created where we're dealing with this gross inequality that black people didn't ask for, right? And so when we start there and we look at what's happening to our people, there are 3 things that will really undo some of those things beyond the psychological trauma and support that people need. Education is key in this country. Employment is key in this country. And then marriage rates or co-parenting are key in this country. The reason why so many African Americans are poor, people go right to education and employment, when you look at it, in this city, 80% of our families are led by black females. There's 1 income coming in that household, not 2. For white families, we're almost 65%. Their numbers are diminishing too. 65% of their families are 2-income families. And then co-parenting, they still might have, even though it might not be together, you still have 2 parents that are contributing to the income of that child. So that child is not necessarily experiencing the same level of trauma or deprivation that a black child is experiencing. So when we think about the inequity and how it plays out in our community, if we don't tackle educational inequity, if we don't tackle employment inequity, and if we don't tackle the issue of even if you're not going to get married, you got to parent that child together, right? If we don't tackle those 3 things, then we will continue to see these challenges take root. So I tend to focus on this inequity issue as an ecosystem model, that there are many, many things that impact the way people move forward, the way people live their lives. And so when you think about an ecosystem, it's everything that you would come into contact with, people, organizations, institutions, the environment. How does it impact you in your life and ability to move forward? So when you think about black people here, I grew up here. My family's been here since 1907. There ain't that many white people in Madison that can claim that they've been here that long, right? So welcome to my hometown. I'm not one of these brothers that just crossed the boat from Chicago, although my family came through Chicago in 1907. Okay, so all my brothers and sisters from Chicago, we just got here before y'all. But when we look at when we look at what's happening to black people in this city, we are some of the most disempowered people in the United States. We don't own anything hardly. We have very few businesses. We have very few successful businesses. Property, in 1980, 80% of black people were renting property, either a home or an apartment. In 1990, 80% of black people were renting a home or an apartment. In 2000 and 2010, 80% of black people were renting homes or apartments. We're one of the few cities in America of the wealth and prosperity that we have where you saw very little to no movement for African Americans at all up the social ladder. And we're all in these upper little Midwestern states where we're all supposed to be so egalitarian and so open to differences and everything like that. It is the worst place for black people to move forward. So we're stuck in suspension right there educationally. you saw black people make a lot of momentum from 1930s to 1970s, and then around the late 70s or early 80s, you started to see some of our results taper off. So more of us were in numbers getting high school diplomas, but we were in numbers in terms of going to college and all that. We had a lot of kids going, but the percentages that we saw going to college and going into higher education, white folks accelerated far faster than we did in terms of going into higher education. So the gap continued to widen there, and then you started to see in the 80s with the decline of the economy, a lot of us falling out of going to college, doing well in school. So this last generation was a generation that actually took steps backwards, not forwards. And so in this city, education, we saw where 27% of black kids were failing to graduate from high school in 1973 to where just, 2010, we had 50% of black kids graduating. So in this prosperous city, one of the most prosperous cities in America, where even in a serious, what we call depression, right, recession, where our employment rate went up to 6%. That's like perfect in some of these cities in a really good year, right? So why is it that we don't move forward? I'll tell you one reason why in this whole ecosystem model, we talk too much in Madison. We spend in this enlightened city with this big university right behind us. It's my alma mater, but they are some of the most enlightened and ineffective people when it comes to addressing this issue right here in our city. We love to sit down and talk about the problem. We love to dissect and then disagree with whatever solution comes to the table, but we aren't good at putting things on the ground that actually can fix stuff, right? We're not good at operationalizing our ideas, especially when it comes with issue of race. So what I do, you guys, this is just me. I made a decision a long time ago. I'm going to be an institution builder. So I come at the issue of equity where if the system is broken, how do we put in place that can actually be a vehicle that people can walk through to fix it? So when I returned home in 2010, my primary objective, I told the Urban League, was in 4 to 5 years, racial equity, I told this board, will be one of the top 2 issues in this community. And it'll be one of the top 2 issues in this community because we're going to light this community up. We got to get people to see that this is a problem in this community, not just white folks, but black people. We got to stop being okay with being in a second and third class position. We got to lift up our chest, pull up our chin, and know that we're supposed to be here like everybody else. So in order to do that, I had to act like that, right? So I had to put down some crazy stuff. And this charter school was just something I really wanted to get done, right? And actually, I thought we were going to get it done until Scott Walker stepped in office, and I was like, where the heck did this dude come from? And then he wanted to take away unions. I mean, literally, I think Gloria was on the board. We saw we were in for a mess. We just didn't really talk about it. We were so like, we're going to lose, but you know what? We're going to act like we're going to win. And so we went through this challenge, but you guys, part of the issue of addressing this issue is you have to get a lot of people to see that they can be a part of a movement. And so my job coming back here was to get people to see that this city could create its own way out. That black people, if you just decide to do it and you're willing to go all out, you're willing to operate with integrity, motivate people, but go all out, that at the end of that tunnel, you're going to get some results. So what I'm seeing right now in Madison with a school system, we got a superintendent right here who's pushing the envelope. She has a license to push that envelope. She has an expectation, don't you think, to push that envelope. Before, it was just keep doing things the same way and pretend that nothing's going wrong, right? We had to shake that up. Employment, we pushed the issue of workplace diversity here big time with employers behind the scenes, never calling them out publicly, but always kind of leaving a subtle threat that we might, right, if you guys don't do something. But then when we see that they were making progress, we would shout that out too. So some of the diversity that we're seeing in people taking in roles here, uncharacteristic of roles that white people would give us in this community, give those of us who actually earn it and are ready for it, we're starting to see some doors open. And so the education and employment piece is critical, but that piece about strengthening families, what I'm doing now, we said what we see in the next 5 to 7 years, what I'm doing now is trying to tackle how do we ensure that our children are successful, but by strengthening their families. We have to make sure that strong families will raise strong kids. Happy families will raise happy children. And so we've got to have a way to do that. So we started a preschool called One City Early Learning. And our primary objective is to make sure our kids are at the top of their class when they start kindergarten and ready to change the world. Unfortunately, Gloria, the black kids in California, where they're having water problems, you ask those black kids, how are you going to solve that problem? I don't know. Nobody's talking to them about that stuff. Nobody's expecting them to be the innovators that come up with the change to address that problem. Nobody's expecting them to address the water shortages that are going to drive most of the conflicts in the world over the next 20 to 30 years. And so we want our kids to be enlightened and ready for that, but we know we have to make sure that their families are strong and moving forward. So what we're doing is we're making sure that, you know what do you need to get your kid in here? And if you need a scholarship or some level or some help, let's tie that to what your plan is, right? Are you going to school? Are you getting a job? Are you getting a job promotion? What are you doing that's going to make you happy? That's going to make you feel like you're moving forward? Because if we can do that, if we can help you with that and help this child at the same time, we're going to move both of you forward. If we got to call an employer and say, hey, this person we know, but Joe's on our board. He's on our capital committee. We got to connect a group of people, right? Diane Ballweg's right here. She's got connections. We know people. You know, but is there a way we can open the door? Can we talk to someone? Can we help these folks move forward? That's what we're trying to do. So again, this ecosystem models, it takes a lot of different people, a lot of different things to help move people forward. And we're going to do it by now strengthening families. So get ready for that next movement, you guys. Thank you.
I'd like to introduce y'all to Nar. Nar worked as a lead teacher and program director for 9 years. Nar has a master's degree in early childhood studies, specializing in teaching adults in the early childhood field, a bachelor's degree in language and literacy. Nar's interests and specialties include diversity, social justice, equity, dual language learner development, adult learning and development, and professionalism. Nar currently works as a professional development counselor at the Wisconsin Early Childhood Association and as an independent consultant. I'm gonna just remind you, get intimate with that mic and stay intimate with that mic, because you really have to be up on it for us all to be able to hear you. Make some noise for Nar, y'all.
So thank you for having me here. I am really glad to be on this panel, and I wanted to mostly speak about my experience as an early childhood teacher, as a program director, and also some of the work that I do in consulting. Some of the questions that we received, one of them was, what does inequity look like in your work as it pertains to young children, race, and privilege? And being in early childhood as a teacher, what I've seen mostly are inequities that some of them happen at a personal level. Generally, you'll see a group of children not wanting to play with one child because, he's dirty, or you will also have children not wanting to play with a child because of the skin color and so forth. So some of those are very personal, and having been in that classroom, I know those are things that hurt children. And I also see inequities that are due to biases. A lot of the time when children of colors misbehave, it's really blown out of proportion. And sometimes those are more institutionalized. We really look at behavior as when dominant culture behavior is a norm. The way we play, the way we talk to children, the way we communicate with the parents, how we set up those outreach events, it's all about how the majority, the dominant culture wants it. And when children of colors are a little louder, when the parents are not meeting those expectations, we label them. And also, most of the time, the bad child behavior and the bad child label comes and it tends to follow them. So I see those as really damaging to the social emotional development of the child and to the well-being of the family. And one of the questions that says, how does your how do you address inequity? And I think I've been a teacher for so many years, and what I really like that I've been doing as a teacher and also as a consultant, I try to really tell teachers that this work starts with you. You have to make sure that you reflect on your values. What do you really believe that children should be doing? Or how do you think you can create a learning environment for children? If you have strong values that are against this family's values, you have to have some type of discussion and comes to terms with it. You have to be in a place where you can really be caring for that child. So always start with your values and know where you stand. And I know once you get to do that, then you can put in place find the resources that you need. Talk to the families. Make sure you bring in the families, because this work also starts with families. Because I see most of the time when we have issues in our programs, we bring in the expert without knowing that these are the families. Your environment is only equitable if the families think it is equitable. So you have to make sure you bring them to the table. You have to make sure you communicate with them. But more importantly, you have to make sure all those knowledge that you learn from your intake, from being with the families, you have to make sure you're putting those into practice in your classroom. And I always tell teachers to start with creating a couple of 2-3 essential questions that you can that are by nature really overreaching, that you can post in your classroom. Make sure they're your values, they're what you live for. Make sure you talk to parents about those, and also talk to children about it, because I always hear, hey, what is the developmentally appropriate way to talk to children about these issues? Because these are really challenging. And I know children understand fairness, and they understand what's right and what's wrong. So you can always start there and help them understand what those means. And I also, my third question was, what do you notice, where do you notice success in your work towards equity? And I think I do a lot of training with early childhood providers, and I hear on and on again, this feeling that we really need to do more. We are realizing everybody is equal, we love all children, does not really work. We need to move forward. And we're also knowing that all these diversity training that we're doing, if you go to an early childhood program, most of the time teachers have 5-10 hours of diversity training. But the diversity training is generally just, it's posting pictures, it's having a multicultural night, it's really, really basic, and I encourage teachers to go deep, to really kind of think of cultural diversity the way it was intended to be. It is about equity and social justice and making sure your learning environment is equitable for all. So I do a lot of that, and so I'm really hearing a desire for change, and this is really exciting because I feel there's room to grow, but also it's nerve-wracking because I'm hoping we're not just gonna talk about it and then fall back to our old ways. So this is really exciting. Hopefully we're gonna be moving forward with this. One of the questions that I had was also what continues to pose a challenge for your work, and I think I touched on it a little bit. It's that oversimplification of the cultural model that I see that's really just limited on displays, not digging deeper. And I also see a lot of equity literacy. Most of the time, teachers want to do this work, but they don't really have the language. They don't know what's developmentally appropriate for children. So I'm hoping this is something that we can really discuss as a community, something we can address and make sure teachers have the support they need. Because when you go to an early childhood
program, you know teachers are very busy, program directors are very busy. But how do we make sure we're really making this one of our core values and one of a mission to really accomplish? All right, am I doing time? Okay, great. So, and I also see one of the things also that I see that's a challenge is a lack of safe spaces for teachers to engage in these discussions. I think that could be really helpful if we had teachers and families come together in a non-judgmental room, a non-judgment in coming with open hearts and open mind and knowing that this is really difficult. We need to talk about it, and it is the future of our children, and it's that important. So I'm hoping for more safe spaces to really do that. 5 to 10 years, what do you want your work to have meant, and how do you imagine this work will evolve? I think in Madison, we have so many different agencies that are working for social justice. What I would like personally to see them is to work together. Because I think of equity, for me, when you're doing equity work, you can't pick and choose. You can't in your classroom, and this I've learned from years in the classroom, you can't really plan for this African American child and not plan for children who live in poverty. You can't really plan for an immigrant children without planning for gay, lesbian children, because children's identities really intersect. You can have a child that comes from the gay, lesbian family that's immigrant and so forth. So we have to make sure we're really sinking our efforts in equity and making sure we're working for equity for all children. And we cannot just focus on the environment while other children are lacking the food they need, while some children are feeling less than they should be feeling. So I would really like us to kind of sync our organizations and work together for the sake of children. And I would definitely like to see parents being more involved. Most of the time, parents are the last ones that we ask for opinions, that they're the ones that we really kind of tell what to do instead of asking them what do they need from us. So I want us to involve parents in making sure that they're being heard of, because I think a lot of this work too, with my experience, parents are coming from a background where they haven't been welcome, when they have been discriminated, where they have been subject to biases. So they're coming with all their baggage and having to deal with that and having to deal with what's going on with children. So I think they can be a resource for us early educators. And I think that's it for me.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that you brought intersectionality into the space and talked about students' gender identities and orientation and how that impacts students. One of the moments in which I realized success in my own work and teaching was when I was bringing a speaker who was a transgender woman into our classroom, and she was very nervous. She said, "Oh man, I had a rough time in high school. Coming into a high school classroom makes me so uncomfortable." And she entered our classroom, and this is a moment that stands out because Kaleem's here, and his one of his students was there, and immediately complimented her on her attire. And that was a moment that defines success for me. Our students' ability to see people as people, to celebrate people as people. So thank you for bringing that into this conversation. I'm going to introduce our last panelist. Dr. Jennifer Cheatham is the superintendent of the Madison Metropolitan School District. Jennifer's focus is on systematic improvement in urban school districts. Her expertise lies in developing instructional alignment and coherence at every level of a school system aimed at achieving breakthrough results in student learning. Most recently, Jennifer was the chief of instruction for Chicago Public Schools. In that role, she led the central office education team in its efforts to support networks and schools on instructional improvement. She brought to this role a depth of experience in school system reform. She's worked as Chief Area Officer for Chicago Public Schools, as Executive Director of Curriculum and Instruction for San Diego City Schools, and a coach and professional developer for Bay Area School Reform Collaboration. Before joining BASRC, she led a multi-year initiative aimed at improving academic literacy for middle and high school students. She began her career as an 8th grade English teacher. Make some noise for Danielle.
Thank you. All right, can you hear me okay? Yeah? All right, it's great to be here, and it's a real honor and privilege, and I've already learned so much from my colleagues up here on the panel. Gloria started with the micro, some really good examples. Kaleem brought it out to the macro, and I want to try to talk about operationalization because that's what I'm all about as a superintendent. I'm not an early childhood expert, I'm just going to let you know, but I do have a 3.5-year-old son who goes to Preschool of the Arts, and he's teaching me a lot these days about early childhood education. I'm starting my 3rd year as the superintendent, and I've got to tell you, I am bringing everything I've got, everything to bear when it comes to leading for equity in this role, pulling on my 20-plus years of experience as an educator and a leader. And that is because of what Kaleem referenced. Madison, I knew we had challenges in Madison. That's what drew me to this community, but I don't think I quite understood the challenges that we face. We all know, I mean, we're always ranked in the top tier of places to live in America, places to raise a family, but we face the largest racial disparities in the nation. I thought I'd talk to you a little bit about how I think about leading for equity, teaching and leading for equity, with a focus on young children. I want to talk about the strategies that I think are most critical. I'll touch on some of the successes and challenges along the way, and I'll touch on what I hope it will all have meant. I think that you can't talk about inequity without actually understanding what equity means. I was actually just at a forum last week, and the title was, "Everybody's talking about equity, but nobody knows what it means." And I think you can't talk about equity unless you actually know what excellence is all about, right? Equity towards what? Towards what goal? So we've actually spent some significant time in our district, really over the past year, beginning to define for us what excellence means for every child. We went through a visioning process. I actually gave it to Brianna to put out on the back table in case anybody wants it on your way out. We went through this process to define, what do we really want for the children of Madison? What do we think a diploma ought to signify in our school district? And we talked to over 2,500 family members, teachers, community members, students. And what they told us is that mastery of content matters for sure. Got to know that our kids can read, that they can write, that they can communicate well. But it's more than that. We want students to be culturally competent. We want them to have deep interpersonal skills. We want them to have confidence. We want them to be connected to their communities. We want them to be creative, to understand how to stay healthy. You get the idea, this idea of, a well-rounded child who's really ready to engage fully in the world around them. So that's important. What is the universal goal? And with that, you can then devise a strategy that's equitable, that helps you work with the students, the families, the teachers, that are situated in a way that makes it difficult for them to reach that high bar. We don't do children any service when we lower the bar for them. The effect, the poor, woe is me, poor little child. That does no one any service. And it also doesn't do our students any service or our families when we raise the bar, but we're not giving them the support to reach it. So I think it's got to start there. And I think I've learned in the last year in particular in Madison, it's become even more poignant for me that without the clear universal goal, when you institute a strategy that's truly based on equity, that there will be people in our community, usually the ones who have been served well in the past, that feel that the equitable strategy is about taking away. It's about loss. And that's when you get people really pushing back on your strategy. So it's got to start with a clear universal goal that's good for every single child. I want to talk a little bit about strategy. It is just not sexy, right? I mean, it's just not. A former boss of mine and a mentor, Carl Cohn, who ran the Long Beach School District for 10 years, calls it what does he call it? Oh my gosh, what is wrong with me? He calls it the hard slog of school improvement or something like that, right? It's like, sometimes it's like walking through mud. And that's just it. That's just the work. There are 3 things that I would highlight that I've learned over time, and I think we're using in Madison to make an equitable strategy real. And the first is that we have to institutionalize ways of working that are highly disciplined, that provide spaces for our teachers, our leaders and our principals, our central office leaders, our board to make more precise decisions that are based on real root causes. This disciplined way of working is absent in far too many school districts, at least the ones that I've experienced. I think that's incredibly important, knowing what your goals are, knowing what your equitable goals are, devising a strategy to reach those goals, implementing it well, monitoring both implementation and outcomes along the way. It's very technical work, but you can't make improvement without it, not sustainable improvement. The second thing I want to highlight is for equity to be real in a school district, you actually need to know what good teaching looks like. And we love to work on the fringes in education, right? All the kind of programs around the classroom. But I was in a thing this summer, a conference with education leaders from across the country, and we were talking about teaching that's culturally responsive, that's linguistically responsive. And this group of people, some of the highest paid educators in America, could not agree on what they were looking at. Was it good? Was it not so good? It was, very different points of view on instruction, and I think that's incredibly important. So we're working on, with Gloria's help and others, defining what great teaching looks like in our school district and aligning all of our support for incoming educators and long-term educators to that vision and understanding. The third thing that I would highlight is the work of central office. In most places, the central office is just a bureaucracy that makes teachers do things that they don't really want to do or believe in. That is not the way that I see it. The central office has to be a place that's creating the tools and resources that schools need to do their best work. But it most importantly has to be the place where institutional barriers are identified and torn down. The central office should not exist if they're not actively looking for those barriers every day and figuring out a way to resolve them. In Madison now, you see that happening in a whole variety of places. On the curriculum and instruction front, policies and practices related to serving our English language learners better, our students with disabilities better, our discipline practices, which I'm sure some of you have probably heard something about, moving from a a punitive approach to one that's truly restorative and values every child and does everything we can to keep them in the classroom community, to our hiring practices, you name it. And in all of those instances, there are institutional barriers in the way of our district's success and our ability to serve kids well. And undergirding all of these key elements of systemic strategy, equitable strategy, is the need for an explicit discussion about race. You can do all the technical work, but if you're not willing to talk honestly and openly about race, it's just not going to work. And you can't just talk about race without actually doing something simultaneously. It's got to be both of those things in conjunction, because where things like implicit bias become real are in the places where people make decisions about children. Right? It's in the discussion about what intervention a child is going to receive. It's in the discussion about what unit of instruction we're teaching next month. That's where it raises its head, and therefore we got to have that discussion. In Madison, when I'm learning, I'm trying it again. I'm trying to do it better this time. And I'm learning that we have to start by building a deeper trust and understanding of one another as human beings, honoring everyone's lived experience, and what and how that affects the kinds of decisions that they're making and why, right, without judgment. And so we're spending some time doing that right now, just building a deeper trust and understanding of one another. So that when we have to have the difficult discussion, we've got a bank of goodwill built up that will allow us to get through it and not shut down in the process. I want to say a little bit more before I wrap things up on if that's what work on equity looks like, what does it mean to have inequity? I have been really intrigued by this work that Yvette Jackson has been doing. She wrote this book called Pedagogy of Confidence. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but she talks a lot about the importance of talking about the promise of children, about helping students identify their strengths, pushing students to the frontier of their intelligence, and that it actually, when we're building on assets as opposed to deficits, it changes the way a child's brain works. It builds neuroinhibitors when we talk in a deficit view, and it creates neurotransmitters, right? More connection in a child's brain when we're building on assets. So I think that's really important, especially for our youngest children. I can't tell you how hard it is to hear people talk about our kindergartners, our 4-year-olds, as if they've already walked in the door with, I don't know, with gaps in learning. I mean, it's heartbreaking to me. They're 4 years old. They're kindergartners. Can we look for the child's strength and build on it? The last thing I'll say before I wrap it up is just a little bit about what I'm learning as a leader. I'm learning a lot about pace, about what it means to balance urgency with sustainable change. I think it's really hard, and it means that I have to communicate progress a lot, constantly. Without communicating progress a lot, I think people, they start to make things up. They're not sure if you're doing anything. So it's really important. I've learned a lot about productive struggle and my capability of engaging in productive struggle in public on the front of the newspaper. And I'm getting okay with it. I don't love it, but we're a public institution, and if we're going to do the right thing for all children, we're going to struggle. We're going to try things. We're going to make some calculated risks. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to learn from them, and we're going to forge ahead. But I'm learning about that. I'm also learning that this is inherently emotional work. I read an article recently about how to lead through emotional work, and the example was working with cancer patients and how important it is to preview what's going to be hard, to constantly update along the way, and it really struck a chord with me. I thought that's what this feels like. It's inherently emotional work, and yeah, it's our children, right? It's about our children. And then lastly, why I have hope. I want to say a little bit about that. Last year when Tony Robinson was shot and killed, and we had over 1,000 of our children hit the streets, I was very, very moved and proud of them, as I would hope you were too. I get emotional every time I talk about it. I'm so sorry, because the image pops into my head and the feeling of that moment in time. But as a school district, we really struggled. Could our mostly white teacher workforce engage in discussions with children in real time about what was happening in our community? And we had to take a risk. And the risk was they have to. We're going to have to figure out a way to open up this discussion when a child needs it, and assuming that all children needed it. It was powerful for me. I learned something about what our teachers are capable of when given guidance and the opportunity to support all children in real life. And I learned a lot about children. At Preschool of the Arts, they always talk about how children are capable. And that's what gives me hope, and that's what I hope this work will lead to, that we all get, that children are capable. So I'll end there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jen. I want everybody to just close your eyes for a moment. I want you to imagine Harriet Tubman, and I want you to imagine her in a swamp, and I want you to imagine how high the stakes are for freedom, and then I want you to imagine how her feet feel. I told a friend of mine a few weeks ago, I lost a student, and I had never lost a student before. And I said, I feel like I'm at war with the world, and I feel like I'm really tired of fighting the same fight. And he said, join the ranks of everybody you've ever admired. So I want you to take that into consideration when you talk about like the struggle of this work and what it means and how high the stakes are, that you are dedicating yourself to something, that you're giving yourself to something, that you're working for something that's worthwhile, and you are joining the ranks of everyone you've ever admired the second you get really tired.